Boston vibe. An hour from DC, I'm gonna fly. Flying high. I can't wait to see you, I'm feeling high.
I'm from the Western Mass area, around the 5 colleges, Smith, Mount Holyoke, Amherst. I became very interested in music after seeing the Beatles, of course. I'm a child of the 60s, and I love the whole feeling of the 60s where, you go to concerts all the time, and it's really about, loving everybody and bringing people together. I went to Woodstock, the first Woodstock, and I just found magic there. Formed the women's band Lilith after not being able to play with in bands with boys. Basically, I had a little trio with this guy who was a great guitar player, and he played with me and this other woman, but then he left to play in a guy band, and it was just like constantly breaking my heart. So I said, women can do this. Women can make a band. And so I set out to do that, but it was a lot harder than you would think. First of all, women did not play with other women in bands. Women usually sang, maybe they played the tambourine or it was folk music. So I was really way outside of my league doing this, but I just felt such passion about it. Started off as a little trio and ended up being a 7-piece band with horns eventually. We were all throughout the 70s.
I actually came to Boston to go to Berklee College of Music. I was a singer-songwriter, rock chick. Well, we did. We had the Solar Sisters, BJ Beth and the Breakdowns. We did. We were writing a lot of songs. We did different things with other people too, but mainly it was a songwriting team. Rude Girls would have been a huge hit. Everybody loved it. They were playing on the college radio stations.
They were looking for us. We didn't even try to get things played.
Right,
and radio
exactly.
stations were looking for us, and they never did that.
When I was at UMass in Amherst, I left school and joined this band called Lilith. It was all women. They had advertised for a saxophone player, and I answered the ad. And we hit it off right away, and shortly after that, it wasn't too long, we played out in Northampton for about a year, but then after going a short trip down to Georgia, we came to Boston. And so we were playing in Boston for several years, living and playing in all the clubs.
Kathy and Sandy and I, and we just gone to see Monty Python's Life of Brian, and we were in a very, very silly mood. And we were sitting out in the car afterwards, just mouthing lines from the movie. And I don't know how it came out. We just said, let's form a band and let's do girl group songs of the 60s with some of our favorite female musicians. And in that moment, we just started throwing around names, and one name led to another. And it fell together in a kind of a blaze of laughter, really. And that was how the band got started.
I think it was important that the start of it was fun and from us. We weren't put together by a Svengali, because there's a certain amount of that kind of thing. I won't name names, but where, sort of a guy says, I'm going to put together a band of all women. And that was totally not our vibe.
Oh, God, no.
We were all colleagues. We were all serious players. We all had serious track records. I used to go see Didi when she was...
We would all go see each other, yeah.
And we knew each other, and it was a real organic thing, not put together.
We had a concept to start with, which was the girl group thing. The white lipstick, headbands, fishnet stockings, the campy clothes. The stuff that we'd find. It was fantastic, the clothes that we would come up with. I don't even know where mine are now. I wish I could find them.
Started playing drums when I was 14. It was very, very, very interesting. When you're 14, it's a very exciting time of your life. And I had to get a drum set. I just had to have those drums. When I was a teenager, all I could dream about was being a professional drummer. So, about when I was 19, in 1976, 77, I joined Lilith. From 77 to 78. I was in Lilith, and that was really exciting. I had seen Lilith a couple of times on stage, and I thought to myself, God, that's like my ultimate band. All women, which I would love to be in a women's band, and just that they were great. There were 7 of them, and they had horn section. I'm like, I gotta be in this band. And Lynn, who was managing them at the time, called me and said the saxophone player had met me before. So she said, we're looking for a drummer, would you like to audition? I'm like, you know, I was like crazed. But I still had no idea they were out in Northampton, you know, so finally I set up an audition and drove out there and auditioned for them, and I just thought, this is it.
I first got involved with rock and roll in Boston while teaching at the museum school, where a lot of people had bands and were about to form bands. And Jeff and I went to London and saw the Sex Pistols and said, that's it, we gotta do it. So we came back. Pseudo Carol Mankey was a student of ours in video, and she joined us as a drummer, and we formed the Rentals. Obviously, we wanted to be successful. As the Rentals, we got a small deal with Beggar's Banquet in England for a single called I Got a Crush on You, which featured Carol.
This is all wound up. I'm all wound up.
1979, I was checking out Boston. I was living in a suburban area in Massachusetts, and I was driving in and out, checking out the Rat, going to the local Cantones Club, and just wanting to see if anybody needed a drummer or a vocalist. And we were just coming out of the punk era, so you know it was kind of fun to see what was going on at the time. Very exciting time. Drumming was my passion, so was singing. I came from a musical background, as you know, my mother sang, and my dad was a country artist back in the 70s, 60s and 70s. He was in a band called the Chisholm Brothers, so country music was my background, but I also loved a lot of the British bands that were, you know, coming out at the time, and that was my passion. Whenever I could, I was playing, getting in with bands, and the first band I actually got in with when I was hanging out at the Rat was a band called Phobia. And they were looking for a vocalist, so I took them up on the offer. Because I went from Phobia, and then I went into the Cosmetics and played drums, and the Cosmetics started around 1980. So I played with Lou Miami and the Cosmetics. The famous Lou Miami. And so after about 2 years of playing drums, I decided to kind of give it a rest and put the kit away for a while and just carry a microphone and a mic stand instead of a huge drum kit.
I started when I was really young, like a lot of people, but this is the mid-1960s. And when I moved up here to Boston, I was in my late 20s, and I found things to be considerably easier to form a band here and get involved than I had experienced in other parts of the United States. New Orleans was a joy. When I was doing music there, I was just down there for like 6 months, let me say. I would be singing in front of the band, and there would be two women on either side of me, nude, stripping, grinding away. It was really rough.
Well, I had always played guitar and music. You know, I grew up, you know, it was the 70s, and I was certainly playing songs and following the Stones and Bob Dylan and Joan Baez and Joni Mitchell and, you know, Neil Young, everybody. And so I always played guitar. I was always drawn to music. I always wrote poetry. I wrote song lyrics and stuff like that. But came to Boston to go to Mass College of Art. And Now it's the late 70s, and it's punk rock is happening, and everybody in art school everybody was starting bands. Like the scene with punk, the scene was so integrated with visual art, and it was such a vibrant time to be in college because the Talking Heads, all these people everywhere were you just felt like anything was possible. Well, they can do it, I can do it, So even though I played guitar for fun with a friend of mine, Mark Durant, who was at Mass College of Art with me, and my boyfriend at the time, Ken Travers, who was in a punk band called People in Stores. We just started jamming in our basement, and I just decided to pick up drums and just had 2x4s and stuff, and eventually got a kit. So my first punk band, I was the drummer. It was a trio, and that was Children of Paradise. And that was late 70s into early 80s.
I grew up in New England and left and went to New York for several years, and that's where I met Gregor Batis, who's a bass player and songwriter. And I lived in New York for about 6 years, came back to Boston in about 83. And at that point, I was of legal age to get into the clubs, and we started bands, and we started hanging around the scene, and just, we had a band called Social Butterflies. We started out with that, and that kind of fell apart as bands do, and then we put together a band called One Fish, Two Fish, and that band we did okay with that one. It was really good. We had some cuts that were played on some of the indie spots that they did on like WBCN, and the college stations really liked us, and it was a kind of a synth pop band. At that point in time, there were a lot of girl songs that were really, really big on the radio, and Johnny and them, they wanted to start incorporating some other music. They kind of wore out what they were doing, and they started writing some parodies. And so they asked me to be a part of that and do some of that stuff. And then they eventually added Meg Lyons, and we became the chicks of the Swingin' Erudites. We were the girl singers, and it just kind of grew from there.
I feel funny. Do I look funny? You can be sad. You're looking for the right. When the damage is done, your damage is good. It's not to say it's not okay. I wouldn't have it any other way. A heart that hurts is a heart that works, a heart that hurts is a heart that works. Sweet, sweet pain, 'cause with the sun lying down, so get up. Burn a heart later, and so later explodes. It knows too cold. I'm bleeding pretty colors, yeah, all over myself. A heart that hurts is a heart that works.
What happened was this thing called the Boston Groupie News came out, and it was a single-sided, single-sheet, double-spaced of really, really nasty gossip about a lot of the people on the scene, and no one knew who did it, and it just sort of showed up. And months went by, and number 2 never came out. And so at that time I sort of had a relationship kind of with Willie Loco, and he had pretty much just talked me into doing the Groupie News, picking it up and doing it, doing the second issue. And he said, everyone thinks it's you anyway. All this gossip, all this news, you might as well do it. So I thought, sure, that would be great, and that'll give me actually something to do to contribute to the scene instead of just hanging around. So I did do it anonymously for probably the first several issues, and I would type it up, and I would bring it to the clubs and put it on the cigarette machines and bring it into record stores. And I'd go to the clubs like in the afternoon and leave it there in the afternoon so no one would see me do it. And eventually people realized it was me. So, but I felt like I was giving something back to the scene by actually, writing about the scene. And yeah, there was still a lot of gossip in there, but I was trying to make it more news than gossip. And Willie Loco had a column in there called Deep Thought. And it grew from there. Eventually, I got a parody of the Boston Groupie News in the mail from a reader, and that was Paul Lovell, and who we know as Blowfish. And it was a page with black rectangles which represented the horrible Instamatic photos that I took that pretty much were sometimes almost all black, and it was just hilarious. So I wrote him a letter and I asked him if he would work with me, and we met and we started working together. I was unemployed at the time, so I didn't have a lot of money, but I really wanted to see it grow. I really wanted to start doing interviews in the Groupie News, and also just do things more representative of the scene. So we did start doing that, and it grew from basically a double-sided one page to, I think the longest issue we had was 27 pages. So we did it in print from 1975 till 1982, and there was also Dirt magazine, which was Mark and Linnell Dirt. They called themselves last name Dirt. And then there was Marlowe, who worked as a bartender at Cantone's and then opened her own club called The Space, which was a great club down in the financial district.
And Miss Lynn and Kathy Loeb from the Boston Groupie News, they spread a lot of information and got a lot of people out there, kept the scene going. Everybody knew what was going on because of them.
It all came about because there was sort of a synergy between Lexington, Kentucky, where I was from, and Boston. A lot of people went back and forth, and a friend was going out with Willie Loco Alexander. So I came up, I met him, I met a number of other people, and I decided, wow, I need to get out of Lexington. And I had just started playing bass myself. I started in 1976. And it was not really the place for, an aspiring punk rocker to be. So I moved to Boston, and initially my friend who was going out with Willie had started a fanzine called Miscarriage, the Abortive Truth. And I moved in with her, and we started doing the fanzine together. But that wasn't really what I wanted to do. I wanted to be in a band, I wanted to play. But I answered an ad from a very nice man named David Hild, who was forming a band called The Girls. And I was the only girl, of course. And they were closely associated with Human Sexual Response. They all used to rehearse in a couple of basements down in Dorchester. And I got to know the Humans, and I was one of the few other women involved in the scene at the time was Casey, who was one of their vocalists. Probably the main movers and shakers in the fanzine world were women. It wasn't a struggle from the fanzine side, because everyone loved the fanzine. Everyone wanted to be in the fanzine. I'm talking about Miscarriage. Everyone wanted to be a part of that world. We actually killed us because so many people wanted subscriptions and didn't want to pay any money that we were going broke. We couldn't afford the postage anymore. We were sending the thing out all over the United States, to Canada, wherever, Europe, and we had, and Penny was on welfare, and I had, like some crappy secretary job, and we just couldn't afford it. In 77 to 78. That was for Miscarriage. I worked with Kathy Loeb. I worked with her on her fanzine, Killer Children. That would have been about 82. 1983.
These are 7 musicians, 7 wonderful women who are so much fun, it is hard to believe. Ladies and gentlemen, Girls' Night Out.
Girls' Night Out, when we were doing girl group stuff, then it was really easy for us to get gigs because we were really popular very quickly.
In the 70s, you could actually work a lot as a musician, much more than you can now. To be a female musician as opposed to just a singer playing an instrument.
It was still quite a novelty.
It was a novelty, and it was tricky.
A novelty to be an instrumentalist in particular.
Yeah.
I mean, they're used to having singers and so forth, but...
Well, a female singer fronting a band of males, but...
Yeah, right.
We had a manager, Julie Fiore, and she got us from point A to point B. We wanted to go point C. What we as a band encountered, what she as a manager encountered in the 80s was, I believe, a bit different in terms of the resistance that we were talking about in the 70s was different in the 80s.
Well, I think in Girls' Night Out, part of what helped us become successful quickly in the Boston area was that we started as a cover band, and then we added originals, and at the end we were an original band. And so, but we kept our audience through that transition, right? So it wasn't just we jumped on the scene trying to get over with these original tunes. We had the audience already built in from doing the girl group stuff, and they stuck with us.
I feel badly for young musicians now trying to break into, what we call the trench work.
Yeah.
Just that musical experience of being able to play with other people and be able to get out there.
It's true.
There are not too many venues. When we were playing here in the late 70s, well,
Early
really
80s,
through the 70s and the 80s, there was so much work for musicians. There were places you could work, 7 nights a week with a double on Thursday and Saturday.
And we got to play things like the National Now Convention was being held in Washington, D.C. in 1978. And only women's bands that had a record out were allowed to be considered. And we happened to have the album out that year. I was in Lou, Miami. We really started peaking around 1984. Our popularity was an all-time high. And we started going to New York a lot, playing clubs in New York a lot, like Peppermint Lounge.
Our first gig was October 19th, 1977 at the Birdcage, which was a biker bar in the combat zone. And David's songs were very interesting. He would come across a graffito like, Viet Cong women carry guns, American women are no fun. And that would be the song. And he'd repeat it 100 times or whatever. And it was pretty arty. He went to Mass Art, and so did, I think, the other guy in the band. And it wasn't really what the bikers were expecting. So there were a lot of cat calls, and most of the bikers, I think, had never seen a female musician before. So it was a little bit rough.
We opened for The Clash, which was the most exciting thing ever to happen and continues to be one of those noteworthy business deals. And we went to New York. Probably the least pleasant, but in the end kind of notorious experience was opening for PIL at the Ritz in New York, which turned into a huge riot. I can't say I had any advantages or disadvantages. Suffice it to say, being part of a team And my husband Jeff is very aggressive about booking us and getting things done. Carol was also very instrumental. We all played a part, you know, in schmoozing and getting to meet people and opening for other bands and trying to book gigs and do the whole thing. We did do the rentals when the rentals went to New York, and we played a lot of wonderful gigs there at Hurrah and Max's and Danceteria and the Mud.
It was more acceptable to be a woman fronting a band here. There was less resistance with the men that I worked with. However, there was a certain amount of conflict with other women groups sharing the stage with me. They felt a little bit intimidated from what I heard. At the time that we were playing out the clubs, there were about 20 clubs in Boston, and you generally have like 3 bands a night. I think about the only band that would consistently do it was Lizzie Borden and the Axes. They would constantly share the stage with us, but other bands frequently would not. We were at all the clubs around town that would have us. We were also out of town. We made a few, trips up to like Maine or down to the South Shore. We were just everywhere. We were also involved with the lesbian and gay crowd in town, and we played a lot of their clubs. And whenever we did, Joy and I would like act up, for like the girls, and the girls loved it. A lot of the women thought that I was gay, So, I was in support of that side of things, and I had a lot of fans. I think my claim to fame is being half nude with Boy's Life in the garbage room, dressing room of the Rat. Oh, there were a lot of bad nights. I was a stepmother at the time, getting home at 5 o'clock in the morning and having to get up 2 hours later to take care of an infant was really rough. Thank you.
Early on, there were no obstacles because the scene was so vibrant. There were so many places to play. We did our own shows all the time. We used to play at Old Cambridge Baptist Church, gallery space, loft space. If you got a loft gig on a Saturday night, that was great. You didn't even need to get in the clubs. In the beginning, not everybody thinks they can do it, so then there's only a few people doing it, and it's a do-it-yourself culture. But because you're only the few, you're special and you stand out. Then as DIY culture grows, everybody's doing it and everybody's trying to get gigs and then all of a sudden now, it's literally just, there's such a glut of talent. Every single person can make a recording in their house. And I hear stuff on Bandcamp every day that will blow your mind. And so everybody's doing it, so does that make anybody less special? No. It just means that you might not draw because there's a million shows a night. There's people who are doing 6 bands a night. There were people interested in us. Yeah. We had people from Sire. There were people down there who couldn't convince the bigwigs, the very enthusiastic underlings
at the labels. But what I remember was talking to somebody big at Atlantic Records after the first showcase, and he said, well, you guys are not, you're older than the Bangles, and I don't know what to do with you. We were 30. We were that old.
Back then it was old,
back
though.
then,
Between 25.
We weren't 23 or 24, and it was kind of an in-between time.
Yeah, and I think also because we didn't start to, to make a big financial killing or something. We started for fun, for love. We loved that we all grew up on that girl group music, which was initially before Didi started writing so much. That's initially we were having fun, and so we tried to we did transition into being a serious band with aspirations, but we all had really different backgrounds and different things we wanted to pursue.
I went to one agent, and he said, he's looking at our promo picture, and he goes, so are these girls all straight? And I'm like, really? I said, I don't know. Why don't you ask them? And he goes, I'd like to see you all wearing the same outfit. Do you think you could all wear the same outfit, like jumpsuits? This is the kind of stuff I was getting asked. Instead of, let me audition you, let me go see the band, he's asking us these kind of questions. He called up this one, and he said, okay, we've got a lot of response. We've gotten a lot of drummers, so what we've done is invite all the drummers over to our house and, just to kind of meet each other and talk and everything. It was really weird. So I said, oh, yeah, okay, I'll be there. So I go over and had my little briefcase with my records and my recordings and stuff like that, and my history and everything in it. And I look around the room, and it's all guys, sitting there wearing their drum t-shirts, Tama, Zildjian, Slingerland, they're all sitting around the room just smoking cigarettes, and I didn't know who was in the band and who were the other drummers, and they're all playing each other's live recordings and stuff, oh, those sound good, there's some good drumming there, and so I'm just standing around, just looking around, not really knowing who I should talk to or anything like that, and one of the guys from the band comes in the room and says, well, here's our latest record, and plays his, the record they just made. And he says, anyone else got any records they want to play? Or recordings or anything? And so I handed him a tape of a song actually that I did with BJ and Beth, called Rude Girls Don't Make Coffee, which had been on the radio quite a bit at the time. So I handed the tape over, and, they're all like, oh, there's a girl here, handing him the tape, and he plays the tape, and the guys are all sitting on the floor. I'm thinking to myself, this isn't happening, is it really? And they go, wow, I know this song. I've heard this song on the radio before. Wow, this is good drums. And, hey, who brought this? And, I stand there and I go, I was like one of the only girls in the world. I put my hand up, and they look around there. Oh, this is a pretty good tape. Do you know these guys? Do you know who was playing drums? And I go, I was. It's like, they had no idea. Nobody knew I was there as one of the drummers to be auditioned.
I probably wasn't able to push in as many areas because I wasn't a guy, and I found that things were probably a little bit more closed in that respect, because I think, guys, it's kind of like the secret handshake thing, it's like, I'm a guy, so I'm going to help you out. But in the other instances, it was kind of like, well, you're a woman, you're good looking, you've got talent, and so, there'll be more doors opening for you in that respect. It's really hard to know what the dynamic is in that respect, because you're on the other end of it, but I think opportunities, when they come their way, they come their way, and they're meant to be there for you.
So eventually, I at the time in the late 80s, the music industry was seriously romancing new music. They were like, how do we get in on this? How do we get the independent record labels to take an interest in us and sign on with us? So they were sponsoring, they were throwing big music seminars down at the Marriott hotel and other locations once a year in Manhattan. They were even going so far as to have open suites, you know, with wine and cheese and everything else, and meet and greet of the artists. They wanted you to come down and give them your tapes. So of course I went for a couple of years to try to network with what I had, and I did meet somebody with Epic Records. I made an appointment, went to the office at the 55th floor, and I go in, I sit down on the couch like I am here, and the guy ends up in my lap, laying down in my lap, and I was 32 years old, and he's putting a Coke spoon up my nose, and he's basically telling me he can give me the record deal that I want and the manager that I need and give me the record career that I want, but I have to have sex with him and this manager. So I walked out. That was the end of that.
But we were all going for that holy grail. We were all going for that. We want to get signed. You know, who's the next one that's going to get signed out of Boston? It almost seemed like around the time the Erudites were dying down and things were kind of shifting, you know, late 80s, early 90s. It was like, I felt like every A&R guy left Boston. Like they were just gone. Nobody cared anymore. They were all somewhere else. You know, Seattle, I think, was the next big thing or something.
And there was the sexism from the audience, of course. I remember one. You remember Bend Over? I mean, I was wearing something like a mini dress or something, and each time I'd reach into my case, we'd be, hey, bend over, and it went on all night long with this drunk asshole, and you know, that did go on. It was no doubt about it, it went on. And I think it may have had something to do with the expectation that women were basically there to be groupies. And if you weren't a groupie, then you were writing a fanzine or a booking agent or managing a band, but you were not a musician. And if you were not a musician, you were not a serious musician. I did very much get that vibe. Probably by the 80s, having a girl bass player was almost expected. And since I was pretty new to bands, it didn't really occur to me that I could have another role. You know, I developed other roles later, and I mean now in Lisa's Hotcakes, I do sing backups, I write songs. You know, I feel like I have a much more equal voice. Of course, that's all women, but even in my jam band, the reggae jam band that I do, since I'm putting it together, the guys are kind of deferring to me. That would never have happened in the old days, at least not in my experience.
Brew girls don't make coffee. Just make love. Brew girls don't make coffee. We just make love. When I come home from a hard day's work, what do you expect me to do? You say to me, get in that kitchen and make some coffee for you. But brew girls don't make coffee. We just make love. Brew girls don't make coffee. We just make love. I got something to say to you that you're not gonna like. If you ask me to make me a coffee one more time, you can leave this house tonight.
Well, in the beginning it was, like I said, they would just laugh at us, they'd point to us. I mean, oh yeah, it was bad. We'd come back the next night to do a gig and we had left our equipment there and it would be on the floor. You know, they'd take it all off the stage because they wanted to hear some real rock like ZZ Top or something. Who knows? It was 1978. I don't even, I mean, so the black community was better at loving us because we were playing soulful stuff and they got it. You know, they loved our music. So it was a lot of problems with the management.
In the punk scene, it wasn't like that.
Right.
The punk was very good for women, kind of the society's outcasts, where you had a chance to be out there and be creative, and you were accepted no matter what you did, even if it was way out there. It gave you a chance. And it wasn't slick, it was fun. It was really a very creative time, a very creative scene. Everybody supported each other. No matter where you play, your friends, male or female, whatever, that everybody would come and hear you play, and we'd go see them. And we're a very, very supportive scene.
At Berklee, nobody's allowed to mess with the girls. When I was a student there, the reason I left Berklee was that I was in my first semester, and it was the 70s, and there were 5 girls in the whole school, which was great for dates, but nothing else. And the faculty was not exactly enlightened. And in the middle of harmony class one day, my professor looked at me and the other girl in the class and said, "Well, girls, what are you doing here? You're just going to get married." And I was so pissed off that I just left and formed a band. I later for this. It's not now. Somebody would get fired for saying that.
Oh, yeah.
So I think that, I know that the young women today are strong and they have to fight, but we really had to fight more.
And having our teachers say, why are you here? You're just going to get married and have babies. And when I used to jam there, I never went to school there, but I used to jam there, and I'd carry my horn case down the hall, and guys would say, "Is that your boyfriend's horn you're carrying?" I'm like, "What am I, a roadie?" So stuff like that happened, and as Didi and I say,
it usually came from the authority figures, from a faculty or from music business people, but it didn't come from our fellow musicians.
But they might be the minority. I think over the years we've had.
But now, if somebody says a comment like that, it's like, let's renegotiate your contract. They're right on top of that now.
No matter what you did, there was a level of hostility or non-acceptance by a lot of guys who just couldn't wrap their head around the fact that there were women who were capable of playing this music. I'm not sure why it was so startling, but there was a knock on the door, and it was some guy started yelling, like threatening us for playing rock and roll. I don't know. I cannot remember what he was saying, but he would,
like, you're not allowed to play rock and roll.
Pretty much, and you're going to be sorry. I mean, it was threatening. It was kind of like, it wasn't just like, hey, it was threatening. He was threatening, and I remember we had to leave via the back doors so we'd avoid him. I mean, it was just, and playing in Cambridge, actually, with a band where some guy yelled out, "Hey, go back to the kitchen."
Sitting in the studio, thinking of the line. When will I get a hit? I worry all the time. I listen to my radio. I want to be heard there. That is what they really want, to be on the air.
I had been playing in clubs for quite a few years, and I thought there's got to be an easier way. It just seemed so difficult. So I have a friend, Karen Kane, who's an engineer in Boston, and she said, "Why don't you go into the studio with some originals?" So I thought of some musicians in the area, some female musicians that I would like to work on the tapes, and BJ was one of them. It was really difficult trying to find female musicians. I mean, people thought it was kind of a joke. They were only used to Joni Mitchell. But I persisted because, I don't know, I just wanted to do it. And there's such a feeling of, I don't know, not power in a negative way, but of control when you get up with all females and they think it's not men making them have the beat, or it's us playing the instruments. It just felt so good. So I stayed with that band for about 7 years, and we made, I think, an impact in the women's movement.
We feel very supportive of women and other women musicians. Like, we don't feel adverse to playing with men in the future. We're open for anything, but we would like to give other women a chance. We've kind of really sweated it out and did a lot of hard work to get to where we are now. And hopefully we'll make it easy for the women that are following us. It's time, and media is really looking at women right now. And I think especially the Boston area too, because of so many other bands have recently been signed and good product has been coming out here. So we're hoping.
We actually had a chance to do a video, which was really cool back then. Videos were still new, and for a band to have a video was a big deal. But I fortunately happened to work at a film and video house in Boston called Cinematographics and Video One. And so all my buddies were filmmakers and video makers and all that, and so we got a really, really nice video done of a really, really crappy song. And it got played on V66, which was MTV's little time slot, local time slot, Boston time slot, and it was hosted by Carter Allen, I guess. So that was One Fish, Two Fish's like big claim to fame, was that we made the heavy rotation in that, which was really cool. We went on to be, these. We had several albums out, charted in Billboard, caused a big stir with Walk Like an Egyptian parody, which was Walk with an Erection. So we recorded that song in someone's bathroom, okay? This guy had in the studio. It was winter, it was cold. I remember being really, really sick that day, probably hungover too. And we went, Johnny said, we gotta record this song, we're doing this song, you and Meg are gonna sing it. And I'm like, okay, so what's the song? Walk Like an Egyptian, but it's, we're writing our own words. And we went, and then came time to do the vocals, and Meg and I were told to go in this room, and we went in there, and it was a bathroom. And we were given one set of headphones, and so we had to split the cord down the middle, and we each had one in each ear. And we sung in this one mic, and we cut that song. And it was like the biggest song that any of us ever had in our whole careers. It was ridiculous. Killing ourselves in these bands, trying to get out there and playing to 5 people who TT the Bears on a Friday night, and just, doing all this stuff. And this ridiculous little thing that we do just takes off. And, for us, it was real hard because we were, we were all serious musicians. We were all serious people about what we did. And it kind of put us off to the side as like the joke. And then it was real hard for us to get respect and get asked to do. Yeah, I mean, we did. We won a Boston Music Award in 1988. That was awesome. And that was real credibility for us.
My mother was very ill with cancer, and I was playing at the Rat that night. And I just come from the hospital seeing her, and I knew, it was probably not going to go much longer. And so 5 minutes before the show we were supposed to go on stage. We were the headlining act. Blue Miami was always the headlining act. The Rat. And about 5 minutes before we were supposed to go on, a waitress comes into the room and says, "Is there a Laurel Blanchard here?" And I said, "Yeah, right here." She goes, "Your sister's been trying to call you all night, and the bartender wouldn't let me pass the message along." And I said, "Oh boy, okay, I gotta go." And the band gets all nervous, thinking I'm gonna go and not come back. So I just went outside and made a phone call, and my sister told me that she had passed. And I went back into the club, and I said, "Okay." And I said to the band, "Let's just get this show on the road so I can go home." So I got up there and did the show 5 minutes after hearing my mother had passed away. So it was hard, but I knew the show had to go on. So I did the show.
What Lilith was, and the important thing to me was, it was standing before people and young girls, women, men, saying, this is what women can do. We can do this. You can do anything you want to do. And out of Lilith became, many groups formed. Girls Night Out, all these groups came out of that because they had seen that the model was possible.
I got a lot of positive response for playing the saxophone with the kind of power and strength that no one had ever seen from a woman before. So it was a mixed bag.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
To you and say, "You're such an inspiration."
Well,
that's always one of my favorite moments. You're such an inspiration.
Yes. That too.
To take up the saxophone or to take up music.
Mm-hmm. The music scene, or the artistic scene, if you will, is an outcome or a reflection of what's happening culturally. And also, conversely, it influences. So it's both.
Yeah.
I mean, it starts things, it reflects things. The stuff that was happening with women on the music scene, certainly back in the 70s, was reflecting what was happening for women. The women's movement was starting. Continuing. It was continuing,
yeah.
rather. Yeah, but I mean, it was gaining a lot of momentum.
Yeah.
Roe v. Wade, and I mean, there was
stuff that was happening.
Yeah, we were feeling our power.
I grew up in an era that was revolutionary, if you will. And there were so many things happening in the world at the time that were groundbreaking on all levels.
One thing that's great is you see so many more female musicians out there. There are way more drummers and bass players and guitar players, really great players, fantastic.
People still come up to me and say, wow, you're the first girl drummer I ever saw, or wow, you're good for a girl. And it's like, really? 40 years later, they're still saying this to me.
For a girl?
Yes, you're good for a girl. I used to use that on everything, you know. I used to name everything good for a girl productions, good for a girl label, you know. Wow, you're good for a girl. Even coming from women would say that to me.
Maxanne, who was a DJ on WBCN, she had a lot of power and did a lot for a lot of the local bands. So there were a lot of people in the scene other than musicians, and I think that's because you have to remember that there might have been like women's lib and all these different things that were happening legally, but it's not like women just changed like that. So I think they started. I always think of the girlfriend groupie caretaker thing, but then it went beyond that. But I think they immediately felt comfortable taking roles, and I know myself too, taking roles in the background as opposed to up on stage, which was sort of like a man thing to do back then.
The early part of my career, there was a lot of sexism involved. It was very rough. The men that I worked with and musicians that I worked with frequently would not take me seriously. They had an attitude like you were supposed to get involved with them or get involved with a group of them. Otherwise, they wanted you to be a groupie also. And I never had an interest in behaving like that. But I think the culture shifted after Patti Smith came out, because here was a woman who did not present an image of being glamorous and like beautiful, but she was an artist and she was being taken seriously as an artist. The industry knew that they could make money from her as she was, and I think that produced a definite shift in like the industry.
I, to be honest, never felt disadvantaged as a woman, ever. I think I was lucky enough to be riding the coattails of counterculture and punk and the rise of women in politics, and I think I just was riding that wave of feminism straight up to my own artistic freedom. I don't have that angle. It's maybe if it was the 50s or my reality was different, it might have been different. But in truth, being a girl, being a woman, always seemed really fun. It was kind of different. It was like, hey, I'm a chick and I rock too, and I get to be one of the boys. Like, that's great.
Jennifer Trynin.
what's the fun? He punks ya, he binds ya, he beats ya, he ties ya. Oh, uh-huh. There's no chance you're getting home tonight. No turning back, you passed the gate. Out of next and calculate. You picked the meal, now you...
And drums for me was just it. It was a way of feeling powerful. It was a way of feeling assertive. It was a way of feeling like I'm going to do something that nobody else is going to do, especially a woman. Because I never dressed up. I always dressed down. My look was kind of I don't know. I don't like to say the word, but it was a little bit masculine. I guess I felt that side of me was good. I did the feminine thing with Phobia. I did the masculine thing with Lou, and played the drums. You know, I did see that other women were trying to make themselves known by dressing in a coquettish sort of way or acting in a coquette. I was not like that. I just didn't dig any of that stuff. I wanted to be one of the guys. Phobia really was it for me as far as being able to front a band and to be able to carry off a whole group, family-oriented group thing with being able to do songs that I wanted to do. Whereas with Lou's thing, Lou was doing a lot of cover songs. He did also write his own songs. And, you're a woman, you wear makeup, you dress up, and it's all about, looking hot and looking sexy and having this objectification that has always been part of any kind of entertainment industry.
The punk was so liberating, as I talked about in the Rat documentary. Punk was so liberating because all of a sudden you had the shared thing, the shared costuming that did not seem sexist at all to me at the time. I felt no inhibition. I felt this rush of freedom, like, oh my God, like I can learn an instrument, any instrument I want, which women weren't starting to do that much yet. But I don't know, I had that feeling. But then Boston, there were a lot of women. The punk scene really created an avenue, a platform for women. Because I was friends with Dangerous Birds, and people in the stores had 2 women. Everybody was self-taught. Hardly anybody was trained. And then Bound to Gag were playing. There were definitely the Maps, Judy Grunwald. There were bands that were happening back then. My boyfriend was punk rock, and just both of us wearing our leather jackets was so deeply symbolic. And you felt as tough. That was the other thing about the punk rock aesthetic, is unlike the aesthetic of the 70s and the 60s, which I copied. I wasn't old enough to be a boomer, but I certainly was on the tail end of that. I mean, if I could have dressed like Anita Pallenberg or somebody like that, I would have. But by the time it kind of got more hippie-ish, I don't know, there wasn't a sense of empowerment really with that. But with punk rock, it was deeply empowering for women. I look at the pictures and I just crack up. I'm like, we look so tough, we look so fierce. There was an attraction to being fierce that did defy sexism in a sense.
Meg and I we were eye candy, but I mean, we were definitely a force to be reckoned with. I mean, we were far from that in that band. But that was the image that we had, And everybody else were the musicians, and they were the ones that got to talk to other musicians differently. We just, granted we were blonde, dancing around like idiots, but I mean, we rocked our asses off.
I don't want to grind on about the male-female thing, but obviously there were not that many women who were actively performing and who had major roles. Maybe women were front for, guy bands, but women performing and playing was very unusual. So it was hard, but we did it, and anybody who had gumption did it. The business is clearly controlled by men for the most part.
I think fortunate to be in Boston because
Yes.
though Boston is so, I mean Massachusetts, but it's so progressive. And so I think the fact that women were stepping out here makes so much sense. Because I don't know about you, but I think you grew up similarly to where my parents basically told me I can be or do whatever I want.
Yes.
And there were no restrictions. And when I told them I wanted to do music, they were maybe a little disappointed, you know, that I wasn't going to do something that was going to earn a big living, but they thought it was awesome.
Yeah, mine too. I was fortunate.
And just do it.
And I agree with Myanna. I think that the music scene that was happening in Boston in those days, it afforded more than New York did an opportunity to get out there and play in the clubs because of the band thing. Because it was a band town. And you know, it's not a band town, really. Boston audiences are so supportive of their bands. Used to be.
Yeah.
But, you know, I mean, followings. People would follow their bands, you know. I mean, they were rabid followers. And so one was able to reap the benefits of that.
The very first gig that we did at the Inn Square, a lot of them said they were going to come and tease us and throw things at us. And they were totally teasing us. But they were hugely supportive. The Boston scene at that time was full of great people, great bands. We had nothing but support from the press and from other fellow bands.
I think, if anything, we had a huge advantage because we were all women.
Girls Night Out was such a juggernaut in all of our lives. It kind of took over our lives for a couple of years. But after that, I got back to the jazz thing and doing my own group and getting back into your neighborhood saxophone quartet. Which it's great because the threads are through all of our lives from before, after, and during, you know, have been very consistent. It's one of the reasons I think a lot of us don't leave the Boston area because there's so many great musicians.
Yeah.
And it's a good place to live and work and also to teach, which a lot of us do.
Yeah, back in the 70s and the 80s, people used to come out to clubs all the time. They didn't stay home with their computers and they didn't stay home with their TVs. Again, it's the whole club scene and getting gigs and promotion and all that stuff is completely different than it used to be. I mean, in the 90s it was a whole lot easier still than it is now.
I do music full time. I play music, I teach guitar, and so I'm feeling that I'm a very fortunate person in being able to do what I love to do and have continued to be able to do that through my life.
Boston, it was very much a garage band, rootsy scene. It was not yet a punk scene per se. It was a punk scene because these were guys who didn't have a whole lot of musical experience and were getting together in garages and making noise. It was punky that way, but it wasn't a punk scene in the way it was in New York with the Ramones and television, or the way it was in England. And we didn't have a Patti Smith. You know, we didn't have a Suzie.
We have a tremendous amount of talent here, and it's why I've stayed here.
Very lucky to be in a very sophisticated, high-level, intellectual, bohemian world where we do have utopian values, we have progressive values, we believe that music can change the world, we believe that art and culture can change the world, and that's just the circle I've traveled in, you know, all my life.
more than performers in the bands, I think there were women doing other things. Of course, the Boston Groupie News was the first punk fanzine in town, but there was also, a little while later, there was Miscarriage, which was written by two women, Loretta Beretta and Carmen Monoxide.
Early days, I think everyone was so impressed by the Real Kids and Willie, because everyone said, and the Cars, and everything was guys. So if women had an impact, it was very, as you say, being part of the infrastructure, being behind the scenes. And I think if we played any role at that time, it was paving the way for other women. You know, someone had to lead the way. Someone has to be the first or the second. I didn't intend to be. I just wanted to play in a band. But at the time, there were so few women that's how it turned out.
Yeah, and I was told I was the first female manager of a nightclub there. And I was actually managing more than they even realized, because I was so hungry for, I just wanted to get in there and I could mix it up with the guys. And literally, I threw a 200-pound guy out by his belt loops one night, right out the front door. Didn't even think about it. He was disrupting my damn show.
As a drummer, I never get to pick, I don't get to pick the material. I don't get to do much. I just sit back there and nobody in the band really notices me. They're all in front of me, and all I see is everybody's asses. I get to see the whole band, and they're once in a while they turn around and look at me, but as long as I'm keeping the beat, they don't feel they have to or something, and I'm usually not noticed by my own band,
It meant everything to me. In fact, when it ended, it was kind of like, your heart breaks. For a long time, I thought that all we had to do was be really good. And we eventually achieved that, from being this little band that had drums that were from S&H Green Stamps, and to being, William Morris was interested in us. Bonnie Raitt came to see us. Her manager was in love with us, and she said she had never been blown away by a band like that in a long time. She came up and hugged us and booked us to warm her up at the Hampton Casino, and this was about 1978. We eventually disbanded in 78 after many years, many members, because we couldn't understand, well, if you could be so good, why can't you make it? And I think it was because we were way ahead of our time. We wouldn't wear the outfits that they wanted us to wear. We just didn't have outside management.
I was watching things not progress. I guess I was just getting tired of it. I was just thinking it's going to be time for me to move on soon. I guess I got tired of the punk scene and not being able to be myself once again, being something that everybody else wanted me to be,
It was the pressures of becoming a commodity and
everybody else making money and us being broke. I mean, honest to God, like I said, we'd play the Channel, which held 1,500 people, and I don't remember what the tickets were, $8 or $10. We'd end up, each of us, making $50 to $60 for a gig. Guess where the rest of it went? So, yeah, I mean, at a certain point, it's like I was living at my sister's house in the room that, it's like this little room extra room that she had, driving a, ancient third-hand car. It's like, at a certain point, it's like, no, people are making money. We're not making anything.
Well, obviously, the most important thing is when we very first started, it was a concept for one gig.
Yeah,
it was never meant to even do anything farther than that. We thought we were going to get together for one gig, have a pajama party on stage.
Getting the foot in the door was easy with the girls because they were art students. They didn't care. there was no sexism from any of them. They were wonderful. The music just wasn't my music. If I could have stayed in that band, in that scene, and played that kind of music, I think I would have been much happier.
Right after the band broke up, we got written up in Billboard magazine. I was also in Trouser Press magazine. Despite all of this, we never got really a good manager, to do anything with me or with a band.
Everything just kind of collapsed, and I just decided that I couldn't really even be around music for a while because it hurt.
We were kind of like fringe. None of us really were like big names, but we were in the scene, and we all knew each other. We listened to each other.
But I think the community that was created really has stayed. There is a beautiful synergy, and then now there's new kids and next generations, and I try to mentor. I'm volunteering at the Girls Rock Camp with Hilk and Mancini and those people to do a songwriting workshop for the girls, and that's just full of like beautiful people helping young girls learn how to play instruments and write songs. All girl, all female, female started, female run. Right now it feels very integrated, very fluid. On any given bill, on any given night, you're gonna have a couple of women front people, you're gonna have women in the bands. But all that's kind of hard won, right? Like that's the journey, you look at civil rights or whatever, society's evolving. I guess what I would like to see is really a celebration rather than, not that critical thinking isn't essential, but it's not so much a critique of the way things were as it is a celebration that they changed.
I'm just really grateful that I was there when I was, because it was so exciting, and I don't know that it's that exciting anymore. I don't know, but it was just amazing to know that at any given point in time, what you were doing could just explode, and you could be heard and seen for doing what you love,
You had a good time, huh?
What is next?
Eddie, that's it. It's all over.
You mean there's no more?
No, all gone, as they say.
You and me, Carla.
Oh, I know. Uh-oh.
Shall we do it again?
What are you talking about?
We'll talk about that later.
All right. It was a wonderful time. Did you have a good time?
It was great, Carla. One final thing to make it perfect.
Uh-huh.
How about a dance?
To make it perfect, I'd love to. Anything for perfection. Good night, everybody.
And thanks again. song.